In Poland this morning, President Biden is meeting with NATO leaders, those who are part of the so-called Bucharest 9, countries from the eastern flank of the alliance. The talks come after yesterday's major address marking the upcoming one-year anniversary of the Ukraine war. Speaking before tens of thousands of people, President Biden said that President Putin had failed to get the, quote, easy victory he predicted, but warned that difficult days were still ahead for Ukraine.
As Ukraine continues to defend itself against the Russian onslaught and launch counteroffensive of its own, there will continue to be hard and very bitter days, victories and tragedies. But Ukraine is steel for the fight ahead. And the United States, together with our allies and partners, are going to continue to have Ukraine's back as it defends itself.
For more on this, we are joined by NBC News foreign correspondent Josh Lederman, who's in Warsaw, Poland, and NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin in Kyiv. Good morning to both of you. Josh, let's start with you. We know President Biden's speech came just hours after Putin delivered his own address. So what was President Biden's key message?
Yeah, Joe, although the White House pushed back on the notion that President Biden's speech was some type of response to President Putin's just a few hours earlier, it sure felt like that way at times as Putin tried to make the argument that it was the West who started this conflict and is to blame for the ongoing violence in Ukraine. President Biden appearing just hours later at the Royal Palace Garden here in Warsaw, saying that it's exactly the opposite, that it is Russia who started this war and that the Western nations who have stepped up to help Ukraine are simply acting as a bulwark against the kind of autocracy and totalitarianism reflected by President Putin's approach. Take a listen to what Biden had to say.
This war is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. He could end the war with a word. It's simple. If Russia stopped invading Ukraine, it would end the war.
But unfortunately, there are no signs right now that this war will be ending anytime soon. And in fact, the tensions only seem to be increasing, with President Biden announcing there will be new U.S. and European sanctions on Russia coming later this week. And overnight, we learned that just ahead of President Biden's secret trip to Kyiv, Russia tested an intercontinental ballistic missile, a part of its arsenal of nuclear-capable weapons. The United States saying Russia did inform the U.S. ahead of time that it planned to undergo that test.
So, Erin, there in Ukraine, how are they reacting to President Biden's speech, and how are leaders there feeling as we approach this one-year mark?
Well, Joe, they're certainly here in Ukraine matching the president's confidence and conviction, many of them pointing to the situation that was unfolding here a year ago. This time last year, the U.S. Embassy had completely shut down. Embassy staff packed their bags and moved to Poland. A full year later, to see President Biden standing shoulder to shoulder with President Zelensky, air raid sirens blaring in the distance beneath the golden domes of St. Michael's is a huge act of confidence building for them. I was speaking to one senior Ukrainian advisor who said that that was a show that Ukraine was going to stay on the map, quote, forever. He also expressed his optimism about the next 6 months of this war, adamant that if Ukraine gets the ammunition and weapons that it has been asking for in a quick fashion, he believes that in 6 months' time they could be approaching the end of the war. And the end of the war, in the eyes of the Ukrainians, is the 1991 borders. He also said that he's currently in negotiations. The Ukrainian government is currently in negotiations with the White House about providing F-16 fighter jets. And he's also confident that ultimately the United States will provide the Ukraine with the fighter jets that they're adamant they need to push the Russians back.
Josh, I want to ask you about something that's happening away from Poland, away from Ukraine. We're watching an important visit by the Chinese foreign minister in Russia. We understand he just met with President Putin, right? What can you tell us?
That's right. We just saw some video emerge on Russian state TV of the Chinese diplomat meeting with President Putin. The two leaders saying that foreign nations are not going to be able to influence the relationship between China and Russia, one that those two countries have described as limitless. And President Putin, in those remarks, said that he is expecting and looking forward to a visit to Russia by Chinese President Xi Jinping. But Beijing is really in the middle of a delicate balancing act here, Joe, because while China wants to maintain those close ties to its ally Moscow, it also needs to maintain a relationship with Europe, particularly given the economic challenges in China. And just before the Chinese diplomat was in Russia, he was here in Europe. He was at the Munich Security Conference trying to shore up those ties with Europe. So the West feels that China is kind of trying to have it both ways on this issue. And the Biden administration, for its part, has made the point that China likes to talk a big game about territorial integrity and sovereignty and other countries not interfering in its affairs. The Biden administration arguing that China is going to lose all credibility on that if it looks the other way while Russia invades its neighbor.
All right, Josh and Erin, thank you both for your reporting this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.